The U.S. military's incredibly secretive African command has been steadily growing over the past 15 years with almost no media coverage. And thank goodness the U.S. military is there, because the people of Africa are one of the top concerns of your average American. The list goes: is my family healthy? Does the car need an oil change? Did Grandpa take his pills? And is there an Al-Shabaab fighter hiding in the bushes outside the capital of Zambia? How much do you know about U.S. Africa Command, or Africom? I bet the answer is not much. In fact, I know the answer is not much, because the Pentagon is keeping a lot of it secret. What we do know comes from leaked documents and fragmentary evidence, like the dozens of secret killer drone bases, or the many murdered civilians, or the bring your mistress to work parties Africom commanders have on Thursday, complete with giraffe liver pate hors d'oeuvres. Here's how the military explains Africom. U.S. Africa Command, with partners, counters transnational threats and malign actors, strengthens security forces, and responds to crises in order to advance U.S. national interests and promote regional security, stability, and prosperity. Okay, some questions. Number one, when has the U.S. ever created security and stability anywhere in the world? Iraq? No. Libya? No. Syria? Nope. Afghanistan? Definitely not. Haiti? Nope. Vietnam? Koreatown? Little Italy? I have to move on, or this episode will be longer than Avatar: The Way of Water. And honestly, the way of water is that it comes out of human genitals every few hours, meaning that movie needs chamber pots next to every seat in the theater. Number two, the U.S. is in Africa to counter transnational threats? Threats to who? Threats to the U.S. in Africa? Then I've got an idea. Don't have the U.S. in Africa! Ha ha! And doesn't having the U.S. military running around Africa killing people generally just create more threats to the U.S.? You know what pisses people off? When someone shows up to their town and kills all their neighbors. That usually does it. Wayne Brady did that to me, and I've never been able to watch Let's Make a Deal again. I mean, I watch it, but I don't enjoy it. The Pentagon's explanation continues. The U.S. supports partners in Africa using a 3D approach. That is, diplomacy, development, and defense. I see. Allow me to translate. Diplomacy equals threats. Development equals bribes. Defense equals blowing up things and people. Oh, 3D approach. Oh, go suck a D. I mean, even the fucking name is offensive. U.S. Africa Command? Could you imagine how we'd react if there were an Iranian U.S. command or a China North America command? We'd fill our britches, then put on new ones, and fill them again. Like when I first learned Michael Douglas was married to Catherine Zeta-Jones. I mean, how did a cow like Zeta-Jones score a drop-dead beauty like Michael Douglas? And everything about Africom is made more suspicious by the fact the Pentagon has long lied about what they're doing in Africa. As journalist Nick Turse reported, during testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee, Stephen Townsend, the commander of Africom, said that Africom maintains a light and relatively low-cost footprint on the continent. This light footprint consists of a constellation of more than 24 outposts that stretch from one side of Africa to the other. If I were to sneeze and cover your face from one side to the other in a constellation of snot, I don't think you'd call it a light footprint of mucus. So let's try to figure out some of the key questions about Africom. Step 1, how many U.S. bases does it involve? Well, although they try to cover it up, with every new document revealed, we have learned over the years about more and more bases and more military actions. Sometimes that's due to FOIA requests, other times it's due to leaked information from things like Fitbits. You heard me right. Fitness tracker data revealed a sprawling U.S. military base in Niger. This reminds me of the time I found out from my ex's Apple Watch that she'd been seeing another comedian. Not sexually. She'd just go to him for a quick one-liner or a callback or something. A real wham-bam, thank you ma'am situation. Just morally disgusting. In 2020, The Intercept got access to at least some of the info about these secret bases. And surprise! The Pentagon's map of bases in Africa contradicted its claim of a light footprint. The 2019 planning documents provided locations for 29 bases located in 15 different countries or territories. Some of these bases are huge and expensive. We're dumping billions into lily pads from which the U.S. murder machine can hop around. It's like having an assortment of friends' couches you can crash on when you need to, except instead of couch, it's a drone base, and instead of crash on, it's drop bombs that turn a small African town into a parking lot. And they don't even have a need for a parking lot because there aren't that many cars in small African towns. Okay, step 2. Find out how bad is the stuff going on at these bases. In 2017, Nick Turse found that Cameroonian troops tortured and killed prisoners at a base used for U.S. drone surveillance. Call me a language stickler, but it's not a base for drone surveillance if it's a base for torture and killing. If a steady flow of kidnapping takes place in my tool shed, I think that's a kidnap shed now. The tools are really just ornamental at some point. Then there's the deaths that seem to follow Africom around like a bad case of herpes or Ryan Reynolds. Did you really think the U.S. could be anywhere without bringing a little bit of death? Nick Turse also revealed the existence of a previously unknown Africom investigation of an airstrike in Nigeria that killed more than 160 civilians. Was the U.S. involved? Does a bear shit on the Pope? The U.S. played a secret role in the Nigerian attack that killed more than 160 civilians. This past July, a group of lawmakers from the newly formed Protection of Civilians in Conflict caucus called on Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin to turn over the files on and answer key questions about the attack. The Pentagon has so far kept mum. Hold on. The Protection of Civilians in Conflict caucus? Wouldn't step 1 of that caucus be to call for the disbanding of the U.S. military-industrial complex, the largest murder machine in the world? Start there, and we can work on the other stuff later. And as if our Congress cares about civilians in conflict. What? It's insane. It's insane. It's insane. I can't breathe. I'm sorry. I just give me a second. I'm sorry. But those 160 are, of course, not the only deaths. For example, in 2019, a U.S. airstrike in Somalia killed 2 civilians, relatives said. And the Pentagon knew about those deaths in Somalia and tried to cover them up. These are just the deaths we've found out about. How many dozens, if not hundreds, are there that never get to any media outlet considering they're happening in the middle of Africa? No, seriously, I'm asking you. I was hoping you'd might know the answer. If you have the answer, hit me up on TikTok and let me know. Please put the answer in a 15-second video with prog rock playing underneath it. That's the only way I can take in information anymore. Help me. Step 3, find out how many and what type of operations the U.S. is involved in. Well, I'm sure it's not many, because from the beginning of Africom, the Pentagon told us it was different than those other U.S. Imperial projects. Africom's focus is on war prevention. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense from African Affairs, Teresa Whelan, said in 2007, rather than war fighting. That's right, we brought our peace guns to Africa. Not those dirty war guns, kind of like the flask of sobriety whiskey I keep in my coat pocket at all times. It's equally alcoholic to regular whiskey, but I only use it to create sobriety. Retired Army Brigadier General Don Baldock, who served at Africom from 2013 to 2015 and headed Special Operations Command Africa until 2017, said between 2013 and 2017, commandos saw combat in at least 13 African countries: Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, Libya, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Somalia, South Sudan, and Tunisia. U.S. troops, he added, were killed or wounded in action in at least 6 of them. Ah, yes. Peace combat in 13 countries. And I'm sure if you were to really analyze them, those 13 countries are more peaceful than anywhere lacking our peace bombs. You may also wonder, is there blowback from these operations? More than an orgy on a windy day. Just from 2015 to 2017, there were at minimum 10 attacks on American troops in West Africa that went completely unreported. So not only is the U.S. engaging in combat, but we're also being attacked. October 2017, Africom was finally forced to abandon the fiction that U.S. troops weren't at war on the continent after ISIS militants ambushed American troops in Niger, killing 4 and wounding 2 more. And oh yeah, did I mention the U.S. has conducted 550 drone strikes in Libya since 2011? But, that report left out the fact that U.S. intervention in Libya has done great things for that country. Well, it depends on how you define great. You know, open-air slave markets are nice because at least they get some fresh air. Step 4. How many operations has Africom been involved in? Well, we don't know all of them, but we know this. By 2019, there had been at least 36 codenamed operations in Africa. And that means the U.S. has more military operations going on in Africa than anywhere else in the world, including the Middle East. Even liberal friend of the State Department Politico called it the secret U.S. war in Africa. So how exactly do you say Africom has a light footprint when in some ways it's the most active theater America has going right now? BT Dubs, theater is the nice military term for anywhere they murder people, like it's a Shakespearean play or some shit. Does a war by any other name not smell as sweet? If we napalm you, do you not bleed? So how does the U.S. get away with having so many military operations that are never reported on? Other than the fact that most CNN anchors couldn't pass an IQ test if it were parked on the side of the highway and they were in a Jaguar? Well, many of these special operations used foreign military units as surrogates in counterterrorism missions. We use this secretive program to wage our proxy wars across the continent. There are at least 11 of those proxy programs employed in Africa, including one in Tunisia, codenamed Obsidian Tower, and never acknowledged by the Pentagon, and another with a notoriously abusive Cameroonian military unit connected to mass atrocities. Nick Turse eventually, after years of hounding the Pentagon with calls, emails, FOIA requests, the occasional erotic cake, pieced together a network of African drone bases integral to U.S. assassination programs on the continent, as well as the existence of a secret network of National Security Agency eavesdropping outposts in Ethiopia. That's right, all told, Africom involves assassinations, bombings, torture, surveillance, killing of civilians, blowback deaths of U.S. soldiers, and of course, covering it all up. All of that's in an honest day's work at Africom, the U.S. Africa command that the Pentagon will barely even admit exists. I don't know why I said an honest day's work. That's not honest at all. That's really stupid. That's like CNN reporter stupid. Just, yeah, cut that. Don't keep this take. That's ridiculous. Of course, none of this gets into the deeper reason we have U.S. bases dotting Africa and spreading like a case of acne on a teenager working over the fryer at McDonald's. The real reason is not to fight terrorists or evildoers. The U.S. government gives aid to 73% of the world's dictators. They give more support to evil shitheads than Donald Trump's man bra gives to his moobs. No, the real reason for Africom is to stretch the U.S. empire and make sure our missiles, bombs, and drones are at the ready for when they're really needed. Kind of like the police on every corner in much of America. Sure, they say they're there to, keep an eye on things, maybe arrest some loiterers, poke a homeless guy, and tell him to move along. That's all they're doing, right? But we see the real reason for their presence when strong protests break out. That's when they show up in their Star Wars outfits with their rollerblade knee pads on and they start beating the life out of unarmed people. The real reason cops are everywhere in America is to protect the status quo of the empire and remind us all who's boss. The same is true for Africom. That's the most censored news for this week, but don't forget to subscribe at youtube.com/behindtheheadlines and go grab some great perks by supporting this completely independent show at patreon.com/behindtheheadlines. Keep fighting.